How many times have we seen an ambitious game fail to meet our expectations at launch? Spore, No Man's Sky, Cyberpunk 2077? It's a shame because we want to get excited for developers that reach for the stars, and reward them for going beyond the formulaic franchises that have yearly releases. Unfortunately, games like the ones I mentioned were often too ambitious for their own good and ended up disappointing a lot of people. Given the recent release of so many disappointing games, I wondered if there ever was a game where the developers tried to do anything and everything and ultimately succeeded. I wanted a game that we as gamers could exalt as the prime example of realized ambition. For several months, I sought after such a game, and I found it in the place that I least wanted to look. I found it in Xenogears. Aside from Berserk and Persona, Xenogears was the #1 topic that everybody wanted me to cover. This is because the game invokes all the common subjects that I discuss on this channel, that being mythology, philosophy, and psychoanalysis. But yet, I avoided it. Why? First of all, the game was apparently so long that it makes Disgaea blush. Second, the game seemed to be so densely packed with lore and narrative that I had no idea how I would be able to present it in a concise, interesting way. Thirdly, I have to produce consistent content on this channel in order to stay within the good graces of the YouTube algorithm. If I played Xenogears, it would interrupt my normal workflow. However, things got to a point where so many people were begging me to do a video on it that I just wanted to be done with it and put it behind me. I started playing Xenogears at the beginning of November, and it took me until the 3rd week of December to finish it. This is why I haven't done a full-on game analysis since November 15th. I've been occupied with just this one game. I can say that my initial appraisals of Xenogears were correct, but I wasn't ready for how correct I was. I can't say that I've ever encountered a single video game that has this much narrative injected into it. Sure, games like Mass Effect or Elder Scrolls have leagues of lore, but those are presented over several video games. Xenogears is like the entire Metal Gear Solid saga packed into one game. In addition, the lore in Xenogears is steeped in so many complex ideas, ranging from the deeply scientific to the deeply spiritual, all of which manifest in a history that spans over roughly 20,000 years. The only group of people that I'm aware of that gave a complete analysis of everything that happens in this game and its wider universe is a YouTube channel called Resonant Arc. They had to do a series of 21 videos in order to analyze every aspect of this game, with the shortest video being just over an hour long and the longest being almost 4 hours. Normally, my analysis videos last between 15 and 30 minutes. So I was left with a conundrum. How do I do a video that conveys the majestic ambition of Xenogears to the largest audience possible? How do I explain really complex concepts without getting bogged down in lengthy but necessary exposition? That is what I have been trying to figure out for over a month. I think I might have figured out a good approach, but before I get to that, I'm going to say something that is as obvious as it is pertinent. If you have not played Xenogears, I highly recommend you do. In my opinion, it is one of, if not the, most ambitious game ever made. If you consider the era that it came out, everything the game does goes above and beyond its contemporaries. It is an epic, in the least contaminated sense of the word. Best of all, though Xenogears was too ambitious for its own good, and I'll explain why in a while, it nonetheless culminates in a satisfying, thought-provoking product that, in my opinion, ranks it among the top 10 most profound video games ever made. As I stated before, that profundity is exemplified by mixing various real-world religious and psychological concepts into an original sci-fi narrative. In order to appeal to longtime fans of Xenogears and newcomers alike, I will provide a synopsis of the 20,000-year period that precedes the game, right up until the moment you take control of the main character. Then I will explain the mind-blowing concepts that are evoked in that period. I figured that by doing this, I could explain most of the coolest concepts in the game, while leaving 90% of it unspoiled for those that wish to check it out for themselves. Plus, if this video does well, I will do more videos, where I go into even greater detail. I hope that happens, because Xenogears is something truly special, and I wish to share more of its brilliance with the uninitiated. Now, let's begin. The story of Xenogears begins in 2001 AD. A mysterious object with a powerful magnetic field is discovered during an excavation. This object was designated Zohar. For several hundred years following the object's discovery, nothing could be confidently surmised about the Zohar's origin. All that was known was that it had existed within the Earth for about 4.5 billion years, and in space for about 15 billion years. Without any clear purpose or meaning, the Zohar was archived. Over 500 years later, the human race collectively decides to begin mass emigration into space. It is strongly hinted that humans left Earth due to some sort of calamity, but that calamity is never detailed. The departure from Earth marked the era that would follow Anno Domini. This was the beginning of the era known as Transcend Christ. Around the year 250 TC, the first emigrants make landfall on a habitable planet which they call Neo-Jerusalem. Then there's a blank space of about 4,500 years of history. All we know about this period was that the human race continued to colonize subsequent planets, all of which were ruled over by a government called the Milky Way Federation. In the year 4743 TC, denizens of Neo-Jerusalem discover a religious artifact aboard a ship belonging to a random religious sect. This was the Zohar. Thanks to the scientific advancements made by humans in the previous 4 millennia, the humans were able to uncover some of the secrets of the Zohar. Within the Zohar was a source of infinite energy, a source that could only be compared to that which produced the Big Bang. When the Milky Way Federation caught wind of the Zohar, they figured that this energy could be used for, what else? Military applications. Due to increasing strife amongst the planets of the Milky Way Federation, the galactic government began work on Project Zohar. This project involved the creation of a weapon fueled by the Zohar's infinite energy source, one that could destroy a planet if its salvation was rendered impossible for any reason. The name of this weapon was Deus. Deus took 23 years to be built into a usable form. 3 months after it reached this workable stage, Deus went rogue and invaded a nearby human colony, an invasion which resulted in several casualties. Though the Milky Way Federation was able to stop Deus and put it into suspended animation, the uncountable numbers of lives lost mandated investigation. Deus was dismantled into 3 components: the body, Deus, the Zohar, and the biological supercomputer which intermediated in between the two of them. That computer was known as Kodanomi. These 3 cores were placed into a ship called the Eldridge, so they could be transferred to a research facility on another planet. This is where the opening cutscene of the game begins. The Eldridge is transporting the 3 cores when all of a sudden, Deus awakens and takes over the ship. The various pilots do everything they possibly can to prevent this takeover, but to no avail. It was during this brief period of increasing pandemonium that a chance event occurs. A random boy named Abel walks up to the Zohar, feeling a holy presence emanating from it. This holy presence senses a deep, honest wish within the boy, the desire for a mother. Upon detecting this wish, the Zohar acts through the Kodanomi computer using a protocol called Persona. The product of the Persona protocol was a woman who would serve as Abel's mother. This woman was named Elohim. Almost immediately following this woman's birth, the Eldridge ship breaks apart above a nearby planet due to Deus's contamination of the ship's onboard computer. Nobody survives the crash save for 2 people. One was Abel, and the other was a woman named Myong, a woman who looks surprisingly like the aforementioned Elohim but with purple hair. This is because Myong actually is Elohim. Before the crash, a protocol called System Hawa was activated on board the Eldridge. This caused Elohim to transform into Myong. Soon after the crash, Myong recovers the Kodanomi and uses it to birth the first humans that would occupy this uncolonized planet. There were 13 of them. One was named Cain, the one who would become emperor of this new planet. Below him were 12 quasi-disciples who made up an organization known as the Gazelle Ministry. There was still the matter of Abel, however. For a brief moment, he had a mother, until System Hawa changed Elheim into Myong. In response to this desire, Myong divides her being into two, one named Myong and the other Elheim. Elheim would possess the motherly temperament that Myong did not desire, so Abel did not have to grow up without a mother. Between the crash of the Eldritch and the moment you take control of the game's main character, there is a period of 10,000 years. In that time, Myong fosters the growth and evolution of the human race on this particular planet, though she does not do this just for the sake of evolution. Given the fact that Myong was birthed via a program linked to Deus, her purpose is directly tied to the rebirth of Deus. In order for Deus to be reborn and become the ultimate weapon that it was always supposed to be, it required several ingredients. The primary ingredient would be human bodies. When the time came for Deus to be resurrected, it would need to merge millions of humans together into one. But that could only happen when those humans reached the peak stage of evolution. On top of this, Deus required the three components which made up the original Kodanomi computer and which, by proxy, make up the human being. The first component is persona, personified in both Myong and Elheim. The second and third components are Animus and Anima, Animus being the masculine component of Kodanomi, and Anima being the feminine. The Animus was transformed into Cain and the 12 members of the Gazelle Ministry. The Anima divided into 12 relics that were scattered across the planet during the Eldritch crash. When those 12 Anima relics are discovered, and they are united with 12 suitable Animus possessors, then they can unite with Myong, Elheim, and the rest of humanity in the body of Deus. For the rest of the game, you will slowly realize that you need to stop the rebirth of Deus before its world-destroying power is realized. And that's the beginning of Xenogears. The events that transpire in the prehistory and the opening cutscene make up roughly 1 or 2% of the entire narrative. That said, the concepts I introduced you to extend throughout the story, and are by far the most intriguing. Things like the Kodanomi, Animus and Anima, they are rooted in a rich mythological and psychological history. Better yet, they are expertly interwoven into the narrative in such a beautiful way that I believe it's almost unparalleled. Let's start at the beginning once again with the Zohar relic. Zohar is a word in Hebrew that means radiance. It is also the name given to a foundational text from a Jewish spiritual tradition known as the Kabbalah. There is one element from the Kabbalah that has shown up a number of times in my analysis videos. I reference it in my analysis of the anime Neon Genesis Evangelion, as well as the video games Nier Automata and Final Fantasy VII. The story in question is the origin of the universe as detailed in the Kabbalah. Here's a quick summary. At the beginning of time, God's presence pervaded the universe in the form of light. Everything was enveloped in an omnipresent, blinding white. Then God decided to create a space within himself where he could create things. Thus, he contracted from within himself. He founded a space of darkness within the light. Within that darkness, God birthed the first man, a hermaphroditic being known as Adam Kadmon. Light emanated from Adam Kadmon's eyes and collected into 10 vases known as Sephiroth. 7 of these vases shattered, because they could not contain the light. The shards from these vases, along with the light they were supposed to contain, spread through the void, and created the universe. The origin of the cosmos in the Jewish Kabbalah influenced Xenogears in numerous ways. The most important example lies with the Kodanomi computer. Kodanomi is etymologically close to Kadmon, and functions in the same way that Adam Kadmon did as well. Just as Adam Kadmon was a hermaphroditic being, a union of masculine and feminine, so was Kodanomi. Prior to the crash of the Eldritch, the masculine Animus and feminine Anima components were united within the Kodanomi. I'd like to make an important distinction for the Christians in my audience who aren't familiar with Adam Kadmon. Kadmon isn't the same as Adam from the Garden of Eden, although they share a similar function. However, if you were to speak to a scholar of Hermetic or occult traditions, one might say that Kadmon was the macrocosmic prototype for the microcosmic Adam of the Garden. In other words, as above, so below. This was a theory that was held by the Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung, whose theories I will be delving more into in a moment. It also seems to be a perspective held by the creators of Xenogears. After all, the first child of Kadonami was named Cain, which was the name of the first child of Adam from the garden. The second child of Adam from the garden was named Abel, which is the name of the boy that came into contact with the Zohar. Thus, following the crash of the Eldritch, the first two children on this new planet were Cain and Abel. Myung, who would split into Elhaim and Myung, birthed Cain and looked after Abel, she is the analog to Eve from the Garden of Eden, the woman who birthed Cain and Abel in the Bible. This is proven by the fact that Myung's last name is Hawa, which is the name for Eve in both Hebrew and Arabic. Also, just like Elhaim was birthed from the body of the Kadonami computer, the analog to Adam, Eve was birthed from Adam's rib in the Bible. The union of all humans in the body of Deus mirrors another Kabbalistic concept that would supposedly happen at the end of time. In a process known as Tikkun, the spark of divinity that resides within every human being would leave their mortal bodies and unite in the body of Adam Kadmon. Finally, here's something interesting for all you Final Fantasy VII fans. Xenogears started off as an early concept for Final Fantasy VII, but the higher-ups at Squaresoft thought the proposed story would be too dark for the Final Fantasy brand. Isn't it interesting that we see allusions to the concept of the Sephiroth in both games? It makes me think that basing the story of a game off of the Kabbalah was the seed that birthed two of the greatest JRPGs of all time. But anyways, returning to the concepts of Animus and Anima, I believe these two concepts were the main reason why so many people recommended Xenogears to me in the first place. These two words reference a theory created by the aforementioned Carl Jung. Jung believed that within every human being's mind, there existed tendencies and behaviors that we repress. We repress them for numerous reasons, but for the purposes of this discussion, we repress certain behaviors because they aren't commensurate with our gender identity. For example, if you're a male, both biologically and in gendered terms, there are unconscious feminine tendencies within you that you repress, because they are difficult to reconcile with your conscious masculine temperament. In simpler terms, there is an inner woman inside every man. The same thing is true for every woman. Within every woman, there is an inner man. Jung referred to a man's inner woman as the Anima, and a woman's inner man as the Animus. Jung believed that it was the duty of every man and woman to reconcile with their inner anima or animus, bring the positive gendered traits into consciousness, and continue to repress the negative gendered traits into unconsciousness. This would turn us into more well-rounded human beings, balancing the masculine and the feminine, the yin and the yang, the chaos and order within ourselves. The end of this balancing act would, in Jung's mind, result in us being synonymous with the God image, a state of being which he called the self. In other words, after perfectly balancing our inner masculine and feminine tendencies, we would evolve into something resembling God. How perfect is it that Deus in Xenogears, whose name in Latin means God, required both Anima and Animus to resurrect? It works perfectly alongside Adam Kadmon, the projection of God, being a union of masculine and feminine. Before I conclude this video, I will discuss one final source of inspiration for Xenogears. It is a religious tradition that Kabbalah stems from, and one that Jung was very interested in because of their psychological insights. That tradition is Gnosticism. Unlike traditional Christian orthodoxy, the Gnostics of the first few centuries AD emphasized gnosis, the accumulation of personal spiritual knowledge through deep introspection, kind of like meditation. I'll cite one similarity and one difference between the Jewish and Christian Gnostic traditions. The similarity is that both traditions see God as an immaterial being who exists in a higher plane. This god births the universe by emanating from the unified light of the immaterial fourth dimensional realm into the dark, material third dimensional realm. This characteristic is found within Xenogears' conception of God, known as the Wave Presence. It originally existed as an immaterial being of light who created the universe through waves/emanations, until it was pulled into what it referred to the cage of fleshy existence. That cage was the Zohar. As for the one difference, the origin of the universe differs between Jewish and Christian Gnosticism. One of the most famous products of Christian Gnosticism is the story of Sophia. Sophia was the name that the Gnostics gave to the feminine spirit of wisdom, whom we first see in the Bible in Proverbs chapter 8. The Gnostics took this spirit and gave her an origin story. Sophia sat at the border between the immaterial and material realms. She fell in love with the possibility of birthing her own creation in the void. Thus, she birthed a demigod known as the Demiurge. This demigod would go on to create Earth and all of its inhabitants, all of whom Sophia loved like a mother. The Demiurge was unlike the one true god of Gnosticism, referred to by names like Ein Sof in the Kabbalah and the Monad in the Valentinian Gnostic system. Regrettably, the Demiurge was a false, ignorant god. His ignorance was infused into the worlds that he created, which caused humanity's never-ending pain and suffering. It was up to the Gnostic to transcend the world created by the Demiurge and reunite with the Monad, the one true god. The humans that we encounter throughout Xenogears are the product of Deus, this game's version of the Demiurge. They are ignorant of their origins from the crash of the Eldritch, just as Deus is ignorant of any god that is more powerful than it. The main characters of this game are tasked with uncovering the truth of Deus and stopping its completion before its power is used to destroy the known universe. To fully prove the Christian Gnostic influence on Xenogears, I point to a character that joins you on your quest. She is one of several reincarnations of Abel's mother, both of whom are named Elohim. One of the reincarnations of Elohim existed 500 years before Xenogears, and was revered as the Holy Mother. That reincarnation was known as Sophia. Like I said, this only covers an infinitesimal portion of Xenogears' narrative. There is too much story for me to cover and analyze in this video. In fact, there was too much narrative for the writers of Xenogears to reasonably fit into the game. Though the first disc plays like your typical JRPG where gameplay is interchanged with cutscenes, the second disc features several instances of on-screen text instead of cutscenes. This is because the game designers did not have time to build explorable worlds and render full-length cutscenes for this part of the narrative. This is why I said that Xenogears was ambitious to a fault. But unlike many of the ambitious titles that release to widespread disappointment in the modern day, Xenogears accomplishes just enough to make those late-game faults virtually irrelevant. If Xenogears was completed properly and didn't release around the same time as Chrono Cross, Vandal Hearts, and of course the PS1 Final Fantasy games, I think Xenogears would be more widely revered. It is a profoundly creative tour de force that most games cannot compare to, even those that release in the modern day. If you are looking for an epic gaming experience with large battles, unique combat, expansive, detailed worlds, memorable characters, and spine-chilling drama, you will be hard-pressed to find all those in a game that isn't called Xenogears. For my money, it's the most ambitious video game ever made. If this video does well, if you guys like it and share it around, I will be happy to do several more videos on this game. I still need to discuss the main character's psychological state, the existential and political woes of the various countries, alongside even more examples of religious influence. I will be happy to do videos on these subjects, but whether or not that happens is up to you.